Spores of the forgotten. I should have known the moment I set foot back in that house that the mocking echoes of my past wouldn't stay buried. My fingers trembled as I gripped the doorframe, half expecting the wood to splinter under the weight of memories. The laughter, the jibes, the scornful glances from faces that had once been familiar. Insane, they had called me. Delusional. I could still hear my brother's voice, thick with derision. You've lost your mind, you know. Those fungi are just mold, Sarah. Nothing more. I had spent years trying to prove them wrong, only to find that the truth I uncovered was beyond their wildest nightmares. I stepped inside, breathing in the stale air laden with the scent of dust and forgotten time. The walls, once vibrant, were now dulled by neglect, and in that silence, an unsettling tension hung. I was a stranger in my own home, and yet I was no longer the girl they had mocked. I had become an expert, no, a harbinger of the horrors that lurked in the shadows of the abandoned places I had explored. Sarah? My mother's voice broke through my reverie, laced with cautious hope. There she stood, frail and gaunt, the years having carved deep lines into her once vibrant face. You're home. Yes, I am, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I had come back armed with knowledge my family had ridiculed, but now it felt like a noose tightening around my throat. Your father will be home soon, she said, her eyes darting to the floor. He's been worried about you. Worried? I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Or worried about what I might bring back? The tension in the air thickened as I sat down in the living room, the familiar creaking of the floorboards, like a ghost from the past. The walls closed in, and I felt the weight of their disbelief pressing down on me. I had returned not to seek validation, but to confront the chilling truth that I had uncovered. In the weeks leading up to my return, I had cataloged the most terrifying discoveries of my career. Fungi that thrived in spaces once occupied by humans, absorbing memories and, as I had theorized, trapping souls. I had witnessed people succumb to their hauntings, ensnared by the very spores I had studied. It was a truth that had turned me into a pariah among scientists, and a nightmare for those who had crossed paths with the cursed remnants of abandoned places. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the window, my father entered. He was a broad-shouldered man, but something about his posture seemed diminished, like a faded photograph. Sarah, he greeted me, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Dad, I responded, my heart racing. You look different, he said, eyes narrowing, assessing me like I was a specimen under a microscope. I could feel their skepticism washing over me, suffocating. But you've come back to us. Not quite, I murmured. I didn't come back to be welcomed. I came back with a warning. The air grew cold, and I began to share my findings, speaking of the haunted fungi and their connection to the past, though I felt their skepticism lingering like a bitter taste in my mouth. I recounted the tales of those I had encountered, the souls trapped within the mycelium, begging for release. You're just trying to scare us, aren't you? My brother scoffed, arms crossed defiantly. This is a joke. No, it's not, I said, frustration boiling over. You don't understand. These spores— Enough, my father's voice thundered. We won't listen to this nonsense. You've let it consume you. In that moment, a chill swept through the room, and the shadows deepened. I knew I had to show them. I reached into my bag, pulling out a small vial filled with the glowing spores I had collected from the remnants of an abandoned asylum. They shimmered in the dim light, a haunting testament to the truths I had unearthed. Look, I said, my voice low, barely a whisper against the rising tension. These are the spores from one of the places I studied. They're more than just mold. The room fell silent, the air charged with a palpable dread. I could sense their disbelief crumbling, and in that moment I felt the past crash against the present. I cracked the vial open, a fine mist wafting through the air. "What are you doing?" my mother shrieked, stepping back as the spores floated into the sunlight. I watched as they danced, shimmering and alive, and felt the energy pulse through the room. Their expressions shifted from ridicule to terror as the shadows began to writhe, coiling around my family like a predator closing in on its prey. I could hear whispers, ghostly echoes creeping into their ears. Shadows of forgotten souls clung to the corners of the room, their mournful cries filling the air. "Sarah!" my brother shouted, his voice cracking as he stumbled back. "What have you done?" "Let them see," I said, my voice steady now, a dark satisfaction filling the hollow of my chest. "Let them understand what they dismissed." My mother's face paled as the shadows encircled her, the weight of their disbelief heavy in the air. I could see it dawning on them, the realization that I had not returned to seek their approval, but to show them the bitter consequence of their ridicule. As the whispers grew louder, I felt the suffocating grip of dread encase me. The shadows swirled, weaving a tapestry of anguish and despair all around us. "You've mocked what you didn't understand," I whispered, feeling their fear wash over me, a wave of vindication. "Now you see." The cacophony of voices rose, drowning out their cries as the room spun with chaos. I felt the weight of their disbelief lift, replaced by a haunting realization that their ignorance had invited the darkness in. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, silence fell. The spores settled, the shadows dissipating into the corners of the room, leaving behind a residual chill. My family stood there, ghostly pale, eyes wide with horror. "I am not insane," I said, my voice a quiet echo of the chaos that had just unfolded. I survived, and I now carry the burden of these truths. As they stared at me, I understood their horror went beyond fear of the unknown. It was the terror of knowing they had been wrong, that their laughter had invited something far darker than any of us had anticipated. And I had returned, not as the outcast they had once dismissed, but as the very warning they had ignored. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the mirror. A haunting visage of someone who had faced the darkness and emerged changed, forever carrying the weight of the knowledge that they had rejected. My family was now bound by their own disbelief, and as I stepped out into the night, I felt a chilling sense of vindication. They would never forget this night, the night they learned just how deep the roots of ignorance can run. I had become what they feared, and it was a truth they would carry long after I was gone.